My name is Ann Beeds, and I was the creator and executive producer of Square Pegs. My then agent, a very wise, courtly, older gentleman named Frank Cooper, uh, said to me, "Boy, I bet you were popular in high school." And I said, "No, not at all. In fact, I was a nerd in high school. I was really a square peg." And he said, "Well, why don't you do a show about that?" And basically, I pitched the story of myself and my best friend in high school. And then the next day, I got a phone call from Frank, my agent, and they said that they just had a few questions about the series. And one of their big questions was, will there be sex and drugs? And I said, no, because these girls definitely don't do drugs and they don't have sex. I mean, they only wish. And so they chuckled and they bought the show. Another thing that added to my square peg likeness was that not too many women at the time were doing what I was doing. And in fact, I wanted to hire for this. I mean, I wrote the pilot, but for the series, when we got the series pickup, I really wanted to hire women writers because they were telling the experience of two young girls in high school. And it was A, hard to find women writers, and B, the network actually compelled us to hire a token male writer, Andy Borowitz, because they felt that we had, too many women writers. So we had, reverse stereotyping where we had to hire a guy. I think another aspect of my sort of being plunged from the very safe cocoon of Saturday Night Live into the what Kim LeMasters referred to as network hardball was that although I had written a pilot completely on my own in a vacuum without any studio attached to it, which when the pilot pickup was looming made me very, very popular in Hollywood. Um, because studios wanted to get in on it. I think that they didn't really think that I was going to be as hands-on a producer as I wanted to be. And I think they thought, yes, she's executive producer. But I think that the studio that I ended up with kind of didn't expect me as a girl and a completely inexperienced girl to try to micromanage the show to the degree that I did. I had been taught to just be on every detail, and I really saw that as the only way to fulfill my vision of the show. And I think one reason we're sitting here doing this is that I was able to pretty much execute 70% of the vision that I had. And I think if you get 70%, you're doing real well. You're never going to get 100% of your vision, but I think that it came to 70%, and I think in Hollywood that's a really good score. The casting was an intense and drawn-out process, and it was very important to me that Patty and Lauren be cast age appropriately. And Embassy was one of the few studios, having had experience in doing a lot of kids shows like Facts of Life and so on, that was willing to work with underage actors because everyone else just saw it as a huge inconvenience. We went out and scoured the country for unknowns, and a lot of credit for that has to go to the casting director, Eve Branstein, who traveled around to Boston, Chicago, everywhere, looking for the perfect cast for this show. She really got into the spirit of it. And I remember that, strangely, Sarah Jessica Parker was the first person that we ever read for the role of Patty Green. And she came in, and I immediately, I remarked on her talent, but I reacted to her as being too pretty. to play this part. And Eve took her sunglasses and smashed the lenses out of them and put them on her and said, now read it again. Oddly enough, we couldn't find an actress who was chubby to play the role of Lauren Hollister. So I just remembered that on Saturday Night Live we had these fat suits for the bee costumes. And I thought, okay, light bulb, you know, that's it. We'll just put her in a fat suit. And so we had to force poor Amy Linker to wear, well, force. we politely requested that Amy Linker wear body padding and fake braces. We had a contest to name the school. And when I went to New York and met up with Paul Schaefer, he just said, well, why don't you just call it Weemawee? And he wrote the anthem, the school anthem for the show. And the waitresses came into the show because I was trying to find a band that could come out and appear in the first episode. And my friend Lynn Goldsmith was helping me with some of her record company connections. And she was talking about this band, The Waitresses, and that they would be great. And as I was driving to the studio one day, I heard a song on the radio called I Know What Boys Like. And I thought, this is the group I have to get. Forget The Waitresses. These are the right people. And I called her up and said, well, this is the group. And she went, those are The Waitresses. So it was clearly meant to be. And, you know, somehow we persuaded these people from the rock and roll world to come out and agree to write a theme song and appear on a television show. To me, music was a very important element of the show. And actually, I always like to say that there hadn't been rock and roll on television since Ozzie and Harriet, when Ricky Nelson, Tracy's dad, you know, played his songs, because Miami Vice hadn't happened. So people were really not using rock and roll, pop music on television. And now, of course, you can't do a show without it. And, you know, it was so important in teenage lives, and I felt it had to be important in the show. Back in the day, almost every teenage girl in America was watching the show. But that wasn't enough for CBS. So they wanted more male viewers. So we decided to go after the #1 male box office star in America at that time, Bill Murray. Ghostbusters Bill Murray. And I called him up, asked him if he'd do it. He said sure, he would. So we started to figure it out and schedule it. And the night before he was due to shoot, he called me in the middle of the night and said, I'm in Mexico, and I don't know how to get out in this motel in Tijuana. And I nearly had a heart attack. And of course, he was in Los Angeles, where he was supposed to be. And that was Bill. But, you know, he came and he was incredibly gracious and he charmed everyone, and he never did a take the same way twice. And I think I particularly remember another musical moment from the show, which was Bill singing Bolivia, It's Unbelievable. Because Saturday Night Live was such a big part of pop culture then, and amazingly enough, still, I had made John Femia's character, Marshall, a big fan of everything in comedy, and particularly Saturday Night Live. So one of his idols was Father Guido Sarducci. So we were able to get Father Guido, Don Novello, to come and appear in the video game episode where he exorcises Marshall from his addiction to video games. And you know, that was that was the kind of thing that made Square Pegs, I think, a little less than mainstream. We always tried to put some kind of twist in the story, some kind of fantasy or fantastic moment in all of the stories, whether it was merely a visual, like Sarah playing the Charlie Chaplin eating his shoe homage, or if it was the villagers going to Marshall's house with torches a la Frankenstein. And this was all stemming from a template that we had set in the pilot where we had a fantasy dance sequence. And I guess it touched people. And, you know, I guess there's more misfits out there than you might imagine. The motto of the show was, "It's okay to be lame." And I still find that somewhat of a comforting slogan, because the other basis for the show was that when I was suffering and tortured in high school, my mother said, "Well, someday you'll look back at all this and laugh." And little did I know that she was right. And not only that, I could get other people to laugh too. So I have letters that people wrote at the time saying things like, "I don't understand it. It's as though you had eavesdropped on my girlfriends and my conversation." And I guess that there was something real about it. And that was really what I was trying to achieve, is that I wanted them to have messy hair. I wanted them not to seem plasticized. And I felt like a lot of teenage shows at the time were kind of like processed cheese. A lot of television was like processed cheese, and you didn't have the feeling that it had been touched by human hands. And I think that Saturday Night Live was definitely it was definitely touched by human hands, and you could get that same feeling that there were people behind this process about Square Pegs. And so I guess that would be the secret of its success. Harvey Shepard at CBS called me with good news. Guess what? We're moving the show from Mondays opposite Little House to Wednesdays. And it's going to be matched with this great new show that we're doing, Zorro and Son. That'll be the lead-in. And then you'll be on at 8:30. And I was like, okay. But there didn't seem to be a lot of competition on the other channels. And then they moved the A-Team to 8 o'clock. So Square Pegs, in its new time slot where people had to look for it, was now on opposite the second half of the A-Team with the lead-in of Zorro and Son. So at that point, I pretty much thought, game over. And then when I called up to get the overnight ratings in New York, and they said it was a 12 share, as it had gone from its normal 24 share, which would now make you the queen of Hollywood, to a 12 share, which would now be very respectable. I kind of knew that it was gone. I was at Jane Curtin's house in the country, and I got the news by reading it in the paper. And then Dick Ebersol happened to call up, and he confirmed the news, even though he was from a rival network. And I think I had a very large glass of Irish whiskey that Jane's husband poured for me at the time. but let's say it wasn't a surprise. You know, we got around these kind of standards issues with some very kind of creative thinking, like it was pretty clear that probably Johnny Slash had had some drug experiences, but he just issued the standard disclaimer. No, I don't do drugs. Totally different head. Totally. And then, you know, hey, no one could accuse him of being a druggie. It's amazing to me that there seems to be so much enthusiasm for this show after 25 years. And I always said that, you know, we didn't just have viewers, we had fans. It was like Star Trek, we had fans. And we used to say, pegs forever. And hey, that's all I can say, pegs forever.